All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started as it is 10 a.m. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to the grand finale webinar of Washington Invasive Species Awareness Week. We are so happy you're here, and we're even more excited about the topic today, which is the bullfrog removal in Southwest Washington to protect native pond turtles. Before we get started with the presentation, though, I wanted to just go over a couple logistical items here. And the first one is please put any questions for the speaker into the Q&A box. Now, the Q&A box is going to be found on your Zoom toolbar. There'll just be a little button you can click and a question and answer box will pop up. And that is where you put all questions. We really ask that you reserve the chat simply for any technical difficulties you may be having. So again, all questions into the Q&A. I see my slide. There we go. We are going to be presenting a code word during the webinar, and this is for Washington State Department of Agriculture Pesticide Recertification credit. It has been approved for 1 credit, so please pay attention and you will receive instructions about how to put in your information so that you receive that credit. Also, if you do lose connection to the webinar, the same link that you used to join will be what you click to sign back in. It's very easy. However, if you are still not able to rejoin, you can actually get the audio by calling the phone number that's also in the Zoom invitation. So there's a couple different options for you. And with that, I'm thrilled to turn it over to Stephanie Helms to provide an introduction and a welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maria. And thank you all for being here today. My name is Stephanie Helms, and I'm the Executive Coordinator of the Washington Invasive Species Council. And before we dive into Invasive Species Awareness Week, I wanted to give a brief overview of who we are and what we do. The Washington Invasive Species Council was created by the state legislature in 2006 and is tasked with providing the policy level direction, planning, and coordination to prevent and stop invasive species of all types. We like to kind of compare ourselves to a compass, providing that direction that all members can use related to their invasive species response and management, while also serving as a central hub for outreach and education statewide. Next slide. And to accomplish our mission and goals, the Council brings together all the state agencies that have a role in invasive species, as well as tribal nations, federal and local agencies, universities, industries, and conservation partners. Every organization has a slightly different mission, but the Council unites us all by looking at that big picture, identifying shared resources and responsibilities, and filling in the gaps that maybe an individual agency would not be able to fill on their own. The council itself is staffed by 3 people, including myself as executive coordinator, Maria Marlin, our community outreach and education specialist, and Jessica LaBelle, our invasive species program specialist. And of course, big shout out to the Recreation and Conservation Office for being the administrative host of the council. Next slide. And with that, I want to personally thank you all for being here today, especially on this beautiful Friday. And I'm thrilled to welcome you to Invasive Species Awareness Week, which is a very special week that Governor Bob Ferguson proclaimed in solidarity with the National Invasive Species Awareness Week. So all around the United States, there are events and webinars happening to raise awareness of invasive species and highlight those simple actions that we can all take to stop and prevent invasive species. Invasive species are really impactful and can harm nearly every aspect of our lives. But luckily, many of the invasive species considered the worst of the worst are not yet established here in Washington. So the good news is that we have that unique opportunity to raise awareness and focus on prevention, which is our best tool in the toolbox. Here in Washington, we take great pride in the work that's being done statewide to address invasive species and steward our natural resources. So this week, we're highlighting one region of the state per day in our webinar series. Next slide. And today's region is Southwestern Washington. The American bullfrog threatens native species by eating their young or outcompeting them for different resources. So today we'll be hearing from the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife about bullfrog removal efforts in the Columbia River Gorge and how these efforts are protecting the native and endangered northwestern pond turtle. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce Riley Janquart, an invasive herpetofauna strategist, to kick us off. So thank you all again for being here today. Happy Invasive Species Awareness Week, and over to you, Riley. Thank you.
Okay, I think we are good to go here. I just need to
Great.
make sure
Yeah,
that
thanks,
I have
Molly.
audio going on. So let me just try this one more time. So unfortunately, I'm not able to get the audio to work right now, but that is all right. No worries. All righty. Hello, everyone. Thank you, first of all, to Stephanie, Mariah, and Jessica for having me today. I am super excited to be here. Uh, so I'm Riley Janquart. I am the invasive herpetofauna strategist here at the Department of Fish and Wildlife in Washington. And today I'm going to be talking about a tale of two species. But before we get into that, I just want to say how awesome it is to have all of you here today. One of the best and strongest tools that we have when we talk about invasive species is raising awareness. And that's part of what I'm hoping to do today. We're going to have some fun. We're going to see baby turtles. We're going to see big giant bullfrogs. We're going to learn some things and primarily what everybody can do to help. So, without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so as I said, we're talking about a tale of two species, one native species, one invasive species. Our native species is the northwestern pond turtle, Actinemus marmorata. Pictured here are some recently emerged pond turtle hatchlings, very cute, very small. And when they hatch, they are, oh shoot, maybe just a bit bigger than a quarter. They're very small. And the other species that we're going to be talking about today is the American bullfrog. Pictured here is probably a large female from the looks of it. So let's start with the pond turtle. So that everybody has a good idea of what a pond turtle looks like, I provided a physical description. Now, the northwestern pond turtle is one of two native freshwater turtle species in the state of Washington. You know that you're looking at a pond turtle when you see a medium-sized aquatic turtle. Their carapace, the back of their shell, is relatively smooth, generally fairly dull-colored, olive, dark brown, reddish, or black. Their plastron, the bottom of their shell, is yellow or light-colored with some brown markings, and they have this really awesome mottled skin. A bit more about their life history. So, northwestern pond turtles are primarily aquatic, but they do leave the water for a variety of reasons, mostly to nest, disperse into other water bodies, and to overwinter. And for pond turtles, their overwintering mode is referred to as brumation. Now, brumation means that they are not necessarily completely asleep the entire winter. They will move around a little bit, they will feed, so, pond turtles are active roughly from April to October, most of the warm summer months in the state of Washington. They inhabit ponds and lakes with good sun exposure, and they spend ample time basking at the water's surface. They can bask kind of just on the surface in open water, but they do like to be on logs and rocks, vegetation. They'll bask on just about anything they can make work. And pond turtles are omnivorous, which means that they will eat just about anything. This includes vegetation, aquatic inverts, even amphibians. And for their nesting behavior, so females and males will get together in the summer and they will breed. And after doing so, female turtles will leave the pond and they will travel to the adjacent upland, kind of sandy, vegetated environments around the ponds. They will dig nests and these nests are burrows, so they will kind of just dig and dig and dig and burrow into the ground. And then they will lay their eggs. After they lay their eggs, they will cover the hole for the mound back up with dirt, and they will never return. So over the winter, the turtles will hatch, and then come spring, they will dig their way out of the nest. And then they will basically from there go straight to heading for water. Um, Unfortunately, and we're about to talk about this, when they do that in the spring and they're headed for water, there's often a very hungry predator that is waiting right on shore. A little bit more about that in a minute. We're going to talk about where on the West Coast do you find pond turtles? So when we refer to Western pond turtles, we're actually referring to two different species, the Northwestern pond turtle, Actinemus marmorata, as well as the Southwestern pond turtle, Actinemus pallida. So the entire Western pond turtle range is it's most of the West Coast, all the way from the North Puget Sound ecoregion, all the way down to Baja California. So you can see here on this first graph, the range marked in red is general northwestern pond turtle range, and the range marked in blue is our southwestern pond turtle range. In the state of Washington, northwestern pond turtles are historically found in both the Puget Sound lowlands as well as the Columbia River Gorge. Through a variety of threats, mostly for the gorge populations. This is habitat loss, the construction of highways and railroads adjacent to their habitat. By 1990, the population of pond turtles in the state of Washington was declined greatly to what we think was around 150 individuals. So, as I mentioned, in the Columbia Gorge, habitat loss, degradation, fragmentation is responsible for this large decline, and that's the primary driver up until today. It's a combination of dams, highways, railroads along the Columbia River. But we do have some new threats that are both emerging and novel, and we're still learning about and learning about how to mitigate. One of those is a shell disease. It's actually a fungus called Endomyces testavorans. And this shell disease, it's pretty nasty. So it attacks the carapace of the turtle and it causes lesions and flaking. And we think that it generally reduces their total lifespan. The other new threat that we're going to talk about intensively today are invasive species. So predation of hatchlings does occur by invasive crayfish, as well as introduced warm water species of fish, primarily largemouth bass and northern pike, and of course, the American bullfrog. There we are. A great big male bullfrog pictured on the right there. So the status of northwestern pond turtles in the state of Washington, in 1993, they were declared a state endangered species. Northwestern pond turtles are also proposed for federal Endangered Species Act listing. And 4 of 6 Washington populations are infested with bullfrogs, and that is troubling, especially when you consider all of the gorge populations have bullfrogs, and the gorge populations contain well over half of all pond turtles in the state of Washington. So this is a very significant area of habitat for the pond turtles. For the Washington State Recovery Plan, we have a few very important priorities or objectives with how we want to recover pond turtles in the state. One of those objectives is to establish 5 self-sustaining populations. And in those populations, we would like to see 200 or more turtles at each site with no more than 70% adults. The reason for this is we would like to see small turtles, juveniles, hatchlings, make up a decent, 30% proportion of the total population. That's indicative of natural recruitment. The habitat has to be secure and it has to include a complex of water bodies. Complex of water bodies is very important for pond turtles because it insulates them and gives them some flexibility once we start to look at climate-related drivers, as well as, seasonal drawdowns of water. It just gives them a lot more options and generally helps their population be more resilient. And one of the big objectives that we're going to talk about today is natural recruitment of juveniles. We want to see pond turtles lay eggs. We want to see those eggs hatch. We want to see those hatchlings grow all the way to adulthood without being messed with. Now let's move on to the American bullfrog and how they relate to the pond turtle. So, if you weren't already aware, the American bullfrog is by far North America's largest frog. They are large and they are stout. One of the key identifying features of a bullfrog that's very unique to them is this distinct supratympanic fold. So you can see in the picture, this fold extends from behind the eye, around the tympanum, which is this big eardrum looking thing, and all the way down to the shoulder. So no other Washington frog or toad has this feature, with the exception of the American green frog, which is also invasive, unfortunately, in the state of Washington. So in my travels, in my bullfrog work of the past, I've seen some very big frogs. They have little to no natural predators on the West Coast, and therefore they can grow to enormous sizes. Largest adults can be well over a foot in length, and this is going to be from the tip of the nose all the way to the end of the toes. They can also weigh well over a pound, and yeah, they are enormous. And I did have an awesome audio clip of bullfrog calling, and unfortunately, I don't think it's going to work because I wasn't able to get audio going, but that's all right. We work on bullfrog calling with our voices, and if you aren't already familiar with bullfrog calls, I guess I'll just imitate one. That's a male bullfrog.
Bullfrog.
So, some distinguishing features by life stage. Pictured on the left here, we have the adult male, and a really distinct feature with adult males that are mature and they're ready to breed is they have this really bright yellowing of their underside skin. This is going to be prominent on like the chin, the arms, even the legs. They also have large thumb pads, which you can kind of see in the pictures here. You got some big thumbs going on. These are also referred to as nuptial pads, and they use these when they're breeding. So they will basically amplex the female, and they use these pads to kind of like squeeze the eggs out of the female. The last feature, and this is a feature where if you look at this, you can be sure that this is a male, is if the tympanum, which is this, again, this big eardrum feature, is larger than the diameter of the eye. And you can kind of see in that second male picture what I'm talking about here. Compare it to the female over on the right side, and you can see that her tympanum is much more similar in size, in diameter to her eye. Some other distinguishing features of females is they have a complete lack of the bright yellow pigmentation that you'll see on males. You can see that she's very gray looking. She also will not have large thumb pads, and quite the contrary, female bullfrog fingers are rather skinny. And again, yes, tympanum no larger than the diameter of the eye. Moving on, here we have pictured a juvenile bullfrog. So they are pretty small. It's really amazing the amount of growth that they go through in roughly 2 to 3 years to mature. Juveniles are going to be small, roughly the size of a golf ball. They have a bit lighter coloration, some dark dorsal spotting, as you can see, but they still have that super tympanic fold. So that's always a good feature once they are a full frog to look at to know that this is a bullfrog. As well as tadpoles. So bullfrog tadpoles are very distinct from other tadpoles that you will see in Washington. They're very large, distinctly larger than any other tadpole that you're going to find. They are dark green, they have some black flecking going on, and they do still have that lighter white, yellow ventral coloration on their bellies. They do have black spotting on their tail, and this is pretty distinct. You'll see that black spotting is mostly segregated to the upper half and central portion of the tail. Interesting thing with bullfrog tadpoles that it's unique in comparison to other Washington frog species. Their tadpoles take 2 seasons to metamorphose. So, a bullfrog egg that hatches into a tadpole in, say, the summer of 2025, coming up here. They will overwinter once, and that tadpole will not become a fully fledged frog until roughly the fall of the next season. And this varies from other frogs in the state because other frogs, their tadpoles, will metamorphose the same season that they are laid. So let's talk about the status of bullfrogs in the state of Washington. How are they classified? So bullfrogs are a prohibited level 3 species in Washington under RCW, and this means that they pose a moderate to high invasive risk. So that means that live bullfrogs may not be possessed, introduced into a property or a water body, or trafficked without department authorization. In addition, bullfrogs are also a game species under WAC, and they may be taken by angling, dip netting, spearing, also referred to as gigging, or bow and arrows. There are no daily limits, there are no size restrictions, there's no season, and no license required. The only stipulations that we have in the state of Washington for bullfrog take are, yes, the method and how you take them, as well as they have to be euthanized or dispatched prior to leaving the water where it was taken. So we know what pond turtles look like. We know what bullfrogs look like. Let's talk about how bullfrogs got here. This is a very interesting story. I am very passionate about it, and there's some little known context here that I am excited to share. So how did they get here? It's generally understood that bullfrogs were introduced to the West in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Their primary purpose for introduction was as an agricultural product for food or commercial use. In the late 1800s, I like to say post-gold rush era, there's this movement of frog harvest and frog farming that's pretty fascinating. And something very indicative of that is there's literature that has found a really interesting tidbit that in California in 1895, frog biomass was actually second most valuable fisheries product behind whalebone, which is fascinating. And roughly 20 bucks a kilogram in today's currency, which is astounding. We know that one of the earliest Western bullfrog farms was thought to have been in El Cerrito, California, and that they sourced bullfrog from Maryland and Florida frogs. We also know that some of these bullfrogs from the El Cerrito farm were sent to Hilo, Hawaii in 1897, which, yeah, Hawaii does have bullfrogs, and they've been there for a while. It's really, really troubling out there. In addition, they tripled or quadrupled their biomass at that farm in Hawaii and then resent those frogs back to Sacramento a few years later. These California frog farms persisted well into the 1930s. Some of the other methods that we know bullfrogs have been introduced accidentally are through aquarium and pet trades, as well as release or escape from laboratory and classroom use and research. But we're going to talk more about the bullfrog farms. So in the 1930s, there was this really interesting, fairly well documented movement to farm bullfrogs in the United States. So a bit of context here is that in the 1930s, the United States was starting to come out of our Great Depression economy, which made the context interesting. You know, new financial opportunities are very appealing, and people are looking for new ways to evolve and to start earning money again. So as you can see in these graphics, which are newspaper clippings, I think, and I love these graphics, bullfrogs were started to be marketed as almost kind of a get-rich-quick scheme. And it makes sense based on bullfrog reproductive capability, which we'll talk here in a moment. They're prolific breeders. They're very hardy. Only a few frogs can result in tens of thousands of tadpoles. So it was pretty easy to market that, yeah, farm bullfrogs, their legs are upwards of $3 a dozen in the 1930s, which is a lot of money. And we will send you frogs, grow them, and then we will buy the frogs from you. Yeah, pretty interesting. You can see over here on the right, this is one of the shipment trucks for the American Frog Canning Company, and they are sending out live bullfrogs to whoever has ordered them. Ultimately, bullfrog farming doesn't work out the way that it might seem. So it's not the lucrative gold mine that it was marketed to be for a variety of reasons. One of the big ones is that there's a high mortality with bullfrogs before maturity, and bullfrogs readily cannibalize. And if you're going to raise a species for agricultural production, cannibalism is super troubling. So you might have, say, 20, 30,000 bullfrogs in your pond. However, the amount of those frogs that actually reach maturity, reach a size where you want to harvest them, is very few. Another interesting reason why bullfrog farming doesn't work is they have a pretty absurd feed conversion ratio. So feed conversion ratio is how much food does it take to make a pound of biomass. For bullfrogs, it's roughly 3 to 1. So a pound of food makes about a third of a pound of bullfrog biomass. You have to feed them a lot. Compared to, say, chickens, which are, roughly 1.5 to 2 pounds to make 1 pound of chicken. Another interesting caveat to that is that bullfrogs take 2 to 3 years to mature, whereas that chicken that you've been feeding 2 pounds of food to get 1 pound of chicken, I think today they do it in like 4 or 5 months. That's incredible. Another difficulty with farming frogs is that the food has to be alive. The food has to be moving. So if you're going to culture frogs in high density, you've figured out a way to deal with the cannibalism. You have plenty of food. You'll then find out that the bullfrogs are not just going to eat, feed that you can spread out there. They need moving creatures like bugs, mammals, bats, anything you can think of, they'll eat it. They're difficult to feed. And then lastly, disease. There's strong documentation at this point that some of the farms that tried to do this, they lost, half their crop per se to disease, and that'll happen in just a few months. So having a monoculture of species in such high densities makes them really, really susceptible to disease. So ultimately, these frog farming companies, frog canning companies, they didn't work out. Interestingly enough, I believe there was even a little bit of fraud going on, some scheming. I believe there were some federal mail fraud indictments. I think some people were arrested, some investors defrauded. But long story short, frog farming movement did not work out. There was another revival of it in like the 1970s to 1980s, also didn't work out. However, the one result that we were left with is this: bullfrogs everywhere in the West Coast. So bullfrogs are generally considered to be native east of the Rocky Mountains, save for the Great Plains region. And they are. Like bullfrogs belong there. They fit well into the ecology, they have natural predators, and they don't bioaccumulate so much of the energy in a system, and they don't reach crazy densities or sizes. However, on the West Coast, they don't have any of that. They don't belong here. Ecologically, they don't fit in. They're not a piece of the puzzle. And you can see their native range here in orange and all of their invasive spots on the West Coast. Fast forward to today, and we are working in the Columbia River Gorge to remove some bullfrogs and save some baby turtles. So, main priorities of the Columbia Gorge bullfrog removal. We want to remove all life stages of bullfrog in order to suppress or even eradicate bullfrog populations and improve pond turtle recruitment. We want hatchling baby turtles to be able to get past bullfrogs and grow to, adult size. Bullfrogs are gape limited, which means that they will eat anything that they can fit in their mouth. And unfortunately, baby pond turtles, as you can see in this picture, definitely fit in their mouths. So I was mentioning earlier how as soon as hatchling pond turtles leave their burrows, they kind of beeline for the wetlands. Bullfrogs are there waiting. They are sitting there, they are emerging in spring, and they are hungry, and they're in the perfect spot to intercept all of these turtle hatchlings as they move from burrows to the wetlands. Before we get more into this project, I do want to acknowledge our partners. We are very lucky to have a diverse, dedicated team of multiple different agencies and nonprofits all working together on this. We are working with the U.S. Forest Service, specifically the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area staff. And man, they are awesome. They have provided vehicles for the removal techs. They have done an incredible job of removing egg masses and doing some really intensive bullfrog egg mass surveys in the area. And yeah, they're great. As well as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who has been awesome in providing access as well as housing for our bullfrog removal techs. Our bullfrog removal techs are hosted by Mount Adams Resource Stewards located in Klickitat County up in Glenwood, Washington. And they do a variety of things, but one of the things that they do is bullfrog removal. Mount Adams Resource Stewards, they are subject matter experts when it comes to bullfrog removal. And they currently work on multiple bullfrog projects, one of which you all may be familiar with is the Convoy Lake National Wildlife Refuge Bullfrog Removal Project to benefit the Oregon spotted frog. So they are a really awesome partner because they bring all of this experience where they can hit the ground running and just do a lot of work to remove bullfrogs. Key point here, Mount Adams Resource Stewards joined this partnership and expanded into the Gorge Project last year in 2024. We also work with Friends of the Columbia Gorge, and they are an awesome land stewardship organization out of Hood River, Oregon, I believe. And they do a lot of land acquisition to protect pond turtle habitat. We work very closely with them on many of our sites. And they also provide in-kind help with egg mass surveys and looking for pond turtles. They've done a lot, and shout out to Friends of the Columbia Gorge. We work with them on contracting, grant applications, a lot of awesome stuff. And last but certainly not least, the Turtle Survival Alliance, who has provided funding for equipment, labor, specifically in Site A, which I'm about to refer to here in a minute. But Turtle Survival Alliance, great group of people, very passionate about saving turtles, and none of this work would even be remotely possible with all of these awesome partners, getting together, collaborating, and getting this work done. So thanks to all. Now we have a little bit of a site overview. So here are all three of our main sites in the Columbia River Gorge. You can say they stretch roughly from Stevenson all the way out to Lyle. So you might be wondering why I have these hexagons on this map here. And the reason for that is because pond turtles are a protected endangered species in Washington. Their exact location is sensitive data, and we cannot share that openly. However, I am able to share these hexagons, which give you a rough idea of where they're at. So we can talk about them today. Site A over here in the east is has the longest legacy of control. We've been, working with partners on bullfrog removals since the early 90s. Site B, we've been doing work since 2018. And Site C is new, and we added work at Site C last year in 2024. An overview of our explicit objectives for bullfrog control. We want to, as I mentioned earlier, remove all life stages of bullfrog. This includes everything from egg masses, tadpoles, metamorphs, juvies, and of course adults. During breeding season, we want to prevent breeding and hatching of egg masses as much as possible. And we want to start to use a data-driven approach to kind of demarcate the invasion front and answer questions like, where are bullfrogs? Where aren't bullfrogs? And how does that change? And we do that through frequent monitoring through a couple different methods. One of those is plain old visual encounters, going out, do we see bullfrogs? Do we not see bullfrogs? As well as auditory surveys, which are very useful during breeding season when we have bullfrogs calling. And we do that on foot. And we're also looking into some really fascinating applications of ARUs, or acoustic recording units. You might be familiar with audio moths. to help us have a more passive monitoring approach. So we don't need to be out at the sites all the time, and we can still be collecting data. And another thing we're looking at and have used in the past is environmental DNA, and that's kind of where it's applicable. And through all this frequent monitoring, it helps us to prioritize high risk and critical habitat. Where should we be focusing more or less of our efforts? The last objective that I think is super important when you talk about such a complex, large-scale project like this is using data, using anecdotes from your field crew who do this work every night to help evaluate what we're doing, evaluate our timing, and evaluate our resources to improve our approach over time. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of it. What does bullfrog control look like? What are we doing out there? So primarily, it's survey and removal work. It's all done at night. Bullfrogs they're fairly diurnal. They are active in the day as well as at night. However, they are generally more active for breeding activity at night, and they are much easier to find at night. And this is because when you shine a spotlight at a bullfrog, their eyes glow, and they have this eye shine to them. And conveniently enough, they're also generally stunned, and they kind of just freeze, and they're sometimes pretty easy to catch, not always. So once we find bullfrogs, we will remove them using a variety of methods, and then we will humanely euthanize all life stages of bullfrog. Our projects, we generally use AVMA guidelines for humane euthanasia. This is generally chemicals such as MS222 or tricaine, as well as some physical methods as well. So then staff will traverse wetlands, implement these capture methods that include gigs, nets, simply grabbing them with your hands, which is honestly so much more effective than anybody gives it credit for. And the staff also use air rifles to get some of the more tricky frogs. As they are going about capturing all these frogs, they're going to be recording data such as location, weather conditions, which are super important to help understand bullfrog phenology in these micro sites, survey duration, which we will talk about in a bit, as well as what they caught. And while doing so, we do like to have them monitoring, doing some acoustic surveys and visual surveys for breeding choruses and those pesky egg masses, which we are about to talk about. But before we get there, our field technicians are highly trained in identifying bullfrogs from native frogs, which almost always overlap. And it's difficult. It takes lots of repetitions, especially with the juveniles, like a juvenile red-legged frog and a juvenile bullfrog. When you're out there at night, they can be, pretty hard to distinguish from a distance. And our technicians are highly trained. They have lots of repetitions to avoid and prevent accidental take of our native species. So bullfrog breeding behavior is fascinating. We could spend all day talking about it. There's been a lot of good literature and research done on it, but the skinny of it is that female bullfrogs will typically lay anywhere from 5,000 to 20,000 eggs per clutch. Under certain conditions, it has been shown to be much more than that, upwards of 30,000 or maybe even more, depending on conditions such as temperature, light, available food. These eggs will then take only 2 to 5 days to hatch, which is incredibly problematic because that means that we need to be everywhere within 2, 3, 4 days max in order to make sure that the eggs we find don't hatch. In addition, bullfrog females can lay up to 2 clutches per season, and this is called double clutching. So they will do it once, they will come back and they will do it again. So one female bullfrog could be responsible for, potentially 50,000 eggs in a season, just one frog. So populations can exponentially expand, get out of control very, very, very fast. Bullfrogs are the classic R-selected species with a high number of offspring and low parental care. So you can see this picture here. This is our gelatinous bullfrog egg mass. Generally, these will be spread out fairly wide. Think about, the size of a table. Across the surface of the water, they're generally attached to vegetation, and they're not very easy to remove, but we've gotten pretty good at it. Let's talk about that. So, how do you remove an egg mass? Long story short, very carefully. So you can see me over in this picture here embarking on an egg mass removal operation. This was a large-scale mass breeding event in which we found, I think 17 or 18 egg masses. And when you see them, you gotta remove them. So one of the main tools that we use to remove egg masses is this kind of, we call it a hand pump, but it's a manually actuated, it's a fuel siphon essentially. You'll find these in 50-gallon drums, and they make it pretty easy to just suck up the egg mass and put them in buckets. From there, we will take these buckets and we will bring them to the shore, and they will dry up. That's kind of how we do it. Moving on, we have our control season timeline, and I have a lot of info here. We don't really have time to get into a lot of it, but long story short, bullfrogs emerge in the spring and April when water temps reach about 50 to 55 degrees. Then they move to their breeding habitat. June, July, and August are when you will hear big choruses of bullfrogs, and that's where egg masses are being laid, and we are out there hunting adults, removing adults, and egg masses. As breeding season wanes in about August, we start to see metamorphosis of juveniles, and our tadpoles are turning into frogs. And this is a really great time to have an all hands on deck approach and just pull thousands of frogs out of sites at a time. And we're typically done by about October. So Site A, which I mentioned, has the longest legacy of bullfrog control. Since 1991, we pulled out over 1,000 adult bullfrogs, over 800 egg masses. However, prior to 2015, we have not been doing all stage removals. So volunteers, partners, staff have been removing only adults and egg masses. After 2015, we learned some lessons, and that changed. In Site A, specific to where pond turtles occur, no bullfrogs have been found and captured since 2021. However, we do have positive eDNA results in 2022 and 2023 saying that there is at least one bullfrog around. And this fugitive male bullfrog was seen once in 2023 and once in last year. Roughly, it was once. They went back and looked for it a lot, and he just kind of disappeared, but it's probably a small adult male. And another important part about this site is that we've expanded our radius to about 10 kilometers to try and prevent reintroductions. So we're focusing on not just the pond turtle sites, but the surrounding watershed to try and knock back the whole population and not have reintroductions. So Site B, we've been doing removal since 2018. Pulled out many bullfrogs, over 12,000, roughly 186 egg masses. And this is a difficult site because lots of small, seasonally connected ponds in the spring where bullfrogs move freely when there's rain events. And it makes it challenging. So we do have to prioritize where we are applying our efforts. And we do that by focusing on the healthiest populations of bullfrogs first, where we see the most breeding activity, and then we radiate our efforts from there. And we do continue to monitor some ponds where we think that we have extirpated bullfrogs, but it's very important that we continue to check them. In Site C, like I said, this is new as of last year, but we pulled out 475 bullfrogs and 6 egg masses. Interesting anecdote for this site, there are largemouth bass in a few of the ponds, and we think that this probably affects not only pond turtle recruitment, but also bullfrogs. So there were considerably less bullfrogs here than we thought there would be, which is interesting. And then we did have a cyanobacteria bloom in one of the ponds in the summer, which made it kind of difficult to do work in the high time. So hopefully that's not the same next year.
Riley, just about 5 more minutes.
Perfect. So This is an awesome graph of all the bullfrog captures of last year in 2024. And you can see this really cool seasonality that definitely reflects bullfrog phenology. So we do see frogs emerging in April and in May. The high time of male captures was in June. High time of female captures was shortly after there in the month of July. And then one other thing I want to point out here is you can see our sum of juveniles and our sum of metamorphs. You can see this kind of inflection point right here is right where metamorphosis has started to take off. So we know that they start to metamorphose in August, and then we just have this high time for grabbing as many juveniles as we possibly can. So here we have a summary of all bullfrogs removed in the entire project since 2015. You can see that been pulling out lots of frogs in the past 10 years, and we did do a really awesome job last year, as well as egg masses, which have gone down considerably. And I believe, and we all believe, has contributed to the following, which is really what we love to see. So at Site A, where DFW staff do captures and do surveys for northwestern pond turtles, you can see that throughout all these efforts, all this bullfrog and egg mass removal, we are finally starting to see this uptake in new wild juvenile turtles encountered, which is awesome because it means that we do have that natural recruitment that we're looking for in our recovery plan. And we're doing the job and it's working. You know, we have turtles that are going from hatchling to juvenile. They're not being eaten and will eventually become adults that will create more turtles. That is awesome. So plans for future seasons, we want to increase bullfrog removal personnel. We want to go from one team of two to two teams of two. And we also want to improve our data collection to start looking at some interesting things like catch per unit effort and kind of mapping that invasion front. The last thing I want to talk about today, how can you help? How can you help the cause of saving baby turtles and getting rid of bullfrogs? The biggest thing that you can do is get familiar with bullfrogs. Learn to identify them by sight and sound. Be familiar with their life cycle and their seasonal behavior. And very important, spread the word, share your knowledge, go out there, take your friends, take your family, your coworkers out. Look for bullfrogs and see if you can identify them, see if you can tell a male from a female. The other big thing that is really, really helpful for us biologists is when you see bullfrogs, report it. So the Washington Invasive Species Council has a really great reporting tool that is directly accessible to our biologists in the game. So if you go onto their website, you can click on report a sighting, or you can download an app and either fill out an online form or use the mobile app. But when you're doing so, please remember to include the following. We want an accurate description of the sighting location, and you can like drop a pin or input coordinates. You can get fairly high accuracy. High quality photos is super helpful. And then any other information that'll help us identify and locate the frogs that you sighted. So to summarize everything, we want to prevent the spread of bullfrogs. So if you want to protect a wetland near you, please, please, please report sightings. Public observations, they contribute directly to our understanding of where bullfrogs are. They populate directly on the map that I look at almost every day. In addition, please, if you are going in the water, going in wetlands where bullfrogs may be, or even if you don't think they're there, wash your boats, wash your waders, wash your fishing gear, prevent spreading eggs and tadpoles to other water bodies. In addition, please do not capture or transport any live frog or tadpole, even if you are sure that it is not a bullfrog. Last question. Bullfrogs are a game species. Correct. Can hunting bullfrogs help? Well, in short, absolutely. However, as I talked about, we have learned that removing only the large adults, they're generally the ones that are favored in hunting, they can release younger frogs from competition and cannibalism in a phenomenon known as density dependence. So because they cannibalize, when you remove the large adults doing all the cannibalism, younger frogs actually get kind of a fast track. There are more resources and they have less predation concerns to go around. And this phenomenon was definitely observed prior to 2015 in the gorge, and it did make the problem a little bit worse before we figured out how to make it better. So successful bullfrog control, ultimately, it requires consistent, intensive, multiple year effort, and the removal of all life stages throughout the season. And that is all I have today. We will open it up for a Q&A. But thank you again for having me. And I have had a really fun time today. And I am just, gosh, I love the opportunity to sit and talk about bullfrogs. This is my life. This is what I do. I'm very passionate about it.
Thank you so much, Riley. That was phenomenal. Truly, I think I can speak for everyone when I say we learned an immense amount. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
All right. So if all the attendees wanted to put their questions, think of some great questions, put them into the Q&A. We do have some that I will start going through. And the first one, Riley, is what does secure habitat mean?
Yeah, secure habitat in the context of the northwestern pond turtle means first and foremost, ideally, we don't want invasive species like bullfrogs or warm water fish in that habitat. But it also means that we want to mitigate some human impacts. These impacts are definitely like road construction, highways, railroads that all not only fragment pond turtle habitat, but they also disturb them. Pond turtles, they need to bask to maintain their metabolism, and the more they're allowed to bask, the better they grow, and the better they do. And when they're disturbed, they leave their basking areas, and this has been shown to definitely have an effect on them. So secure habitat is a variety of things. No bullfrogs. We don't want highways going through them, and we want to leave the pond turtles alone.
All right, thank you. Next question, speaking of the pond turtle, are there any introduced turtles, such as the red-eared sliders, that outcompete the western pond turtle?
Yes, absolutely. And red-eared sliders are the big one. So there are a variety of non-native turtles that have been introduced into Washington. Red-eared slider is a big one. As well as, the western painted turtle is native. It has been here for a while. They are definitely less susceptible to bullfrog predation, so therefore they do have a competitive edge to pond turtles. But red-eared sliders, they breed prolifically, and they are the big one that generally outcompetes pond turtles. Yep.
All right, next question. This is such great data. Do you know if similar efforts and data collection is occurring for the western pond turtle populations in South Puget Sound?
Short answer, yes. This is something I am definitely working on. And yes, we do have bullfrogs in the South Puget Sound. We also have pond turtles, and we are currently setting the game plan for how we can start to monitor, and if we need to remove bullfrogs, sure. But so far, as far as I know, I don't think bullfrogs and known pond turtle populations overlap in the South Sound yet. Unfortunately, that's probably going to change. So yeah, we're definitely on it.
Great, yeah. All right, next question. Are there any measures that Oregon is taking, and are you working with them?
Yes, absolutely. So ODFW, I believe there are a couple different bullfrog projects that they are working on. So I am new. My position started in November, so I'm still working on reaching out and trying to have a more collaborative approach. But I do work with a variety of partners, not only Oregon, but also some of our British Columbia Canadian folks who are also removing bullfrogs up in the Creston Valley, north of Idaho. So that's a big part of my job is collaborating and working and sharing knowledge with all different partners because we've learned a lot. I mean, even in the past 10 years about bullfrogs. Yeah.
Great. All right. Could you move pond turtles to areas where there aren't big bullfrog populations, or are they too vulnerable to move?
Yes. This is a great question, an important question to ask because, we do all this work to remove bullfrogs. can't we just take pond turtles and put them in an area where there aren't bullfrogs? Absolutely. In theory, this seems like an easy solution. First and foremost, there honestly aren't a lot of areas where we know pond turtles have suitable habitat that don't have bullfrogs. The other thing is that we want to maintain the living populations that we have where we have them because they've been there for a long time. And as far as we understand, or maybe don't understand, that is where the suitable habitat is, and that's where they have decided to hang on through all these different threats. So, in an emergency where we had significant declines of pond turtles, they're really not doing good. I am sure that would be an option, but until we get to that like DEFCON scenario, we'd like to keep them where they're at. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, thank you. All right, what funding sources are available for other agencies slash nonprofits to support bullfrog removal?
Absolutely. This is a fantastic question. So far, I'm very familiar with the WDFW, the state-funded opportunities. The big one that we have is our wildlife diversity grant. So wildlife diversity grants, and we actually just got done with an application round. I don't know exactly when they will be. But if you go onto the DFW webpage, you will definitely find a page on wildlife diversity grants. And these grants, anywhere from I think $40,000 to $400,000 for application, have been used to fund a variety of bullfrog removal operations, including this one. So that is one that is definitely open for other agencies and nonprofits to apply. And bullfrog removal, it's expensive, it's intensive, and it's heavy on the funds. So I can speak to that opportunity for sure.
Thank you. All right, that's all we have in the Q&A. So I'm going to move to the pesticide recertification information. I did want to draw everyone's attention to the chat. I dropped a link to our Invasive Species Awareness Week landing page, and that is where all of the webinar recordings will be placed, hopefully in about 2 weeks or so. I'll get those processed and uploaded. And now for the pesticide recertification credit. Let me get that pulled up. Okay. It's a hard code word today. I'm making everyone think on Friday. All right. So if you are looking for pesticide recertification credits, or one from Washington State Department of Agriculture, what I need you to do is put into the chat your name as it appears on your license. I need your license number, and then I need the code word for today, or the code phrase, which is tympanic fold. Very important for identifying bullfrogs. So again, it needs to all go into the chat, and it will be one pesticide recertification credit. And after that, you are free to go. I'll keep this webinar open for a few minutes so that people can put that information in. If you need to go find your license, no problem. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and a huge thank you to Riley. That was a phenomenal presentation. Thank you so much.
Can I add just one thing real quick?
Absolutely.
Shoot, I guess the slide kind of went away here, but I know I covered a lot today with time constraints. I did include my contact information. If you have any other questions, if you want to talk more, if you have bullfrog concerns, please reach out to me. I'm available by email and by phone, and I would love to talk with you.
Thanks so much, Riley. And yes, that slide was showing, so it will be in the recording as well. So yep, view the recording, reach out to Riley. You can reach out to me if you have questions and want me to put you in touch with him. We're happy to facilitate that as well. So thank you all. Thanks, Riley.
Thank you all so much.
Bye.